G'day and welcome to Better Picks. Today we're going to continue on with our look into Lumetri Color within Premiere Pro. Now for those just joining us on this video for the first time, Lumetri Color is built-in tools into Premiere for color correcting and color grading. So essentially making color and contrast adjustments to your footage or your photograph if you're using photographs within your timeline as well. And Lumetri Color really has developed into an all-in-one place to make those color adjustments. It really does have an extensive set of tools to be able to make those color corrections and color adjustments to your footage. Now, there's certainly other tools available, and it's not the be-all and end-all, but for general footage and general video work, it is a great way to get your footage looking, to where you want it to be. So yeah, it's certainly a great tool. So for this video, we're going to look at within Lumetri Color the tool or the tab called Color Wheels and Match. Now, Color Wheels, which you can see down on the right-hand side here, I guess could be described as a more traditional way of making color corrections within any video editing tool, and it's a tool that I still use and I still find really effective. And essentially you have shadows, midtones and highlights, and with those color wheels and that, as you can see there, that pointer, I guess for want of better words, in the middle there, it means you can click and drag to make those color adjustments. You can see I'm just making adjustments there to make those color adjustments to get your footage to exactly where you want it to be. So it's a really effective tool. As I mentioned, shadows, midtones and highlights. So shadows one obviously has more of an effect on the shadow areas, midtones, and the highlights. Now this image, even though it was shot on a sunny day, doesn't have huge contrast. It doesn't have big, deep shadows and glaring highlights. So it's a little bit difficult to see the effect on those specific areas. But certainly, when you have an image that has a lot of shadows, if you're shooting a night scene, or a lot of highlights if you're filming in a really bright scenario, like a high key sort of setup, then obviously those highlights will affect more of the footage. An example of that might be if you're filming in a studio on a white backdrop, as an example. Now you can also see within this tool that it has these slider bars on the left of each of the shadows, midtones and highlights, and they just help to control the density and brightness levels of each of those different parts of the image. So you can see here, if I drop down the shadows slider bar, it's a vertical slider bar, which is a little bit different to what we've seen in the past. It makes the shadow areas a little bit darker, and if I lift them up, then it increases the brightness of the shadow areas. Now that's particularly important when you're making adjustments to those shadow areas from a color perspective as well. So you're able to take within this tool alone, or this panel alone within Lumetri Color, some really solid controls to be able to not only adjust the brightness levels or the luminance levels, but also the color of each of those areas. I'm just going to double click those so that they come back to our starting point, and I'm just going to pop those sliders back into the middle so they're back at the default. So the other part of the color wheels and match that I wanted to demonstrate and look at is what's called Color Match, and this is a great tool that's been out with Premiere Pro and Lumetri Color for the last few years. And what it essentially does is, if you have a particular look or a particular color sort of sample that you want to replicate into your footage, then it allows you to do that with a comparison. So it's certainly not a perfect tool. I find that when I use it, I need to make further adjustments. However, it works pretty well. So it's certainly a great way if you're trying to match footage, particularly from, say, for example, two different cameras or two different, slightly set cameras in terms of white balance and settings. It gives you a good starting point to at least get the cameras close to each other, and then allows you to make further refinements and adjustments to get them even closer again. As most people who have done any level of color correction with video will know, matching color on two different cameras is probably the most challenging thing that you could do. So this is certainly a good way to get both cameras' footage to a fairly close point, springboarding you into to be able to then make further refinements and get the footage as close together as possible. So what I'm going to do is I've actually split this one clip into two, and you can see on this first clip I've made some rather drastic color adjustments, not in any way suggesting that this is how I would normally color this image, but just for the sake of demonstration, I want it to be two very different color adjustments on each of the footage. So you can see that first clip has a strong color adjustment, the second one hasn't had any. So I'm just going to click on this comparison view, and you can see on the left hand side of the program monitor now I have the reference, which I've set at this first clip, and the right hand monitor is the current. So this is the current clip, is the clip that I want to adjust. The reference clip, or the reference monitor on the left hand side there, is the one that I want to match the footage to. So where you select the reference on the timeline, you just have a little timeline here on the bottom of the reference monitor. So you just basically slide that footage along, and that's exactly the same as this timeline down the bottom. So you just slide that footage along to where you want it to be. So that's fine. Let's just go roughly exactly the same. So we'll just go there, because the scene's fairly standard all the way through. And what we need to do now, once we've selected our reference, is we need to select the clip that we're going to be adjusting. And then up here on the right hand side, under color wheels and match, there's a little tab called apply match, and that simply means that the software is going to go through and apply the color adjustments it sees as best to achieve the same color on the current to what you have in the reference. Now you also see there's a little tab there called face detection. Face detection means that if you have people in the image and there's a strong percentage of the frame that's has someone's face in it, and that means it's just going to really look closely at the skin tones, which, as we know, is always a bit of a challenge to match when you have two different cameras. Whether you use face detection or not, the best thing to do is just to experiment. Try it with, try it without, and find which results you see as better and closer to what you're trying to achieve. So in this scene, clearly we don't have a face match. We don't have a face, I'm sorry. So we don't need to click face detection. So I'm going to quickly click apply match, and you can see it's pretty quickly applied a color adjustment, and it's pretty close to what that first image is. Now if we go up to basic correction, it hasn't actually applied anything there. Creative hasn't applied anything there. So it's simply applied a change, an adjustment to that footage using the color wheels within color wheels and match, as well as that tonal adjustment slider bars that I talked about earlier on the left hand side, those vertical slider bars. So you can now go into basic correction. You can see that preview of footage on the right hand side, so the right hand clip here, isn't quite the same as the one on the left hand side. So you can make further adjustments from here to get that clip looking as close, or if not perfect, compared to the reference clip. Now it's done a pretty good job. I mean, that color is certainly different to what it was. So it's certainly done a great job, but I would certainly be looking at making further adjustments to get that clip much closer to that one. However, this is a great tool. It's certainly, as I said, a great way to have a reference point and a starting point. Certainly much easier than going from scratch. I think the main reason this tool is so effective and certainly worth looking at is if it helps you to speed up your workflow, it can't be a bad thing. As we know, video editing can take up an exceptional amount of time, and this can just help to refine the process and make things move a little bit quicker and easier for you. So some great tools in there with color wheels and match. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and certainly throw some footage into a timeline with Premiere and start experimenting to see what effects you get. And the more you learn about this process, the more you'll be able to refine and edit your footage with control. Take care and look forward to seeing you next time.